When you think about dangerous jobs, what comes to mind? Maybe firefighters, pilots, electrical linemen. According to the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics, the most dangerous jobs in America are fishing and hunting workers, followed closely behind by logging workers. What probably does not cross your mind is the job of working as a real estate professional. After all, it's a popular job, and you most likely have somebody in your inner friends and family circle who does it. Beyond negotiating offers and listing new homes is the subtle danger: meeting up with strangers in empty houses. In the fall of 1997, that's exactly what a Pennsylvania woman was doing when she took an impromptu call for a showing. She had a knack for closing a deal, and she loved the challenge. But this would not be the case, because this was a setup, a dangerous trap that the 40-year-old veteran agent walked right into, and it would cost her her life. This episode will have a slightly different format than you're used to. We're going to dive into the main case while also exploring the bigger picture of dangers people face while working in the real estate industry. I even have an interview with my friend and realtor, Julia. My hope is that this discussion will illustrate how industry standards and technology have made it safer to be an agent now, while still respecting the very real and valid dangers even modern real estate workers face. Above all, I hope the discussion of the cold cases will reignite discussion that can propel the cases forward. My name is Megan, and each week I cover older unsolved cases and challenge the idea that a simpler time means a safer time. This week, I'm bringing to you the unsolved murder of Charlotte Fimiano. September 11th, 1997, 40-year-old Charlotte Fimiano was having a typical day at the office. Charlotte worked for Weikart Realty Group, where she was a veteran agent of 10 years. This was her second career. She had spent her 20s working as a bridal consultant in a local shop where she was absolutely loved. But her career change was a good fit. She excelled early and quickly achieved the honor of Weikart's $1 Million Sales Club. She was also a repeat member of their Ambassadors Club. Charlotte was married to a man named Christian Fimiano and had an older teen daughter from a previous relationship. They had actually just moved over the summer in 1997 to their new build dream home in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. On this day, Charlotte had her usual clients, but she was also assigned as the office's float agent, or basically their on-call agent. The way this worked was that if somebody called the office and had a house they wanted to see, they could ask the float agent to show them. This also allowed that agent to benefit off that commission, so she was incentivized to say yes to this. And this was so in her wheelhouse. Something to consider was that in 1997, there wasn't an MLS listings page where you could browse and subscribe to text and email alerts for new home listings that met your parameters. Home buying was just so different back then. People would list their home for sale and put it in the paper or the penny saver, and they would bank on somebody driving by or an agent helping by word of mouth. So it was different than just having this giant online database where you could constantly see every single house that was coming for sale or had recently been sold. So on this day, when a man called the office and Charlotte answered, she was not at all alarmed about going to show this house. In fact, she was excited. It was a higher-end house in a nearby town called Lower Saucon Township, and it would bring in good commission. It was listed at $259,000 at the time, and the current estimate I found says that in today's money, and if you were to list it today, it would translate to being about a $630,000 sale. It was located on a cul-de-sac with only a few other houses. was a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath, 3,200 square foot colonial on 3.6 acres. It had a heated sunroom and a pair of fireplaces. It had a contemporary layout, a jacuzzi, a master suite, a koi pond, and even though it was secluded, it was close to the I-78 interchange, which made it commutable to Newark or New York City. The area is just outside of Allentown, and it has good proximity to Philadelphia as well. The home was owned by a local dentist whom had since moved, so it was sitting vacant. At 1 p.m., Charlotte headed out to meet this man at the listing. She drove her Oldsmobile Delta 88 the 5 miles down windy roads to meet the potential buyer. When she arrived at the property on Chelsea Lane, she was surprised to find that she had been stood up. She didn't take too much time to dwell on it. It's not that uncommon in the business. She started up her car and headed back to the office. But when she got back to the office, the phone rang again and she answered. Nobody in the office can say for sure that it was the exact same caller, but every indication would be that it was, because the next thing she did was grab the key to that listing and again head out. Nobody can speak to the content of that phone call or what the potential buyer said. My guess would be something about getting his wires crossed or getting lost or something that made her think it was innocent enough to just go back out there. Later in the evening, her daughter got home from the day and she went into dinner time. Her mom still wasn't there, but she didn't think too much of it because Charlotte was a very involved person. She was part of the Twin Rivers Area Chamber of Commerce, and even her job in real estate alone sometimes had her doing showings after hours, attending dinners, happy hours, networking events, so that wasn't uncommon. But when she didn't arrive home a little while later, she got nervous, and when Christian Fimiano, her husband, arrived home from his job at 11, both Charlotte's daughter and Christian grew very concerned. He phoned police, who said there wasn't much they could do at that point. Charlotte was an adult and she was allowed to stay out without telling someone. The real estate office was closed and he didn't have the number of any of her colleagues. So because of this time in 1997 and the limits that he had to contact, he sort of had to just wait it out a little bit. So he impatiently waited until the office opened and called first thing to say that Charlotte had not returned home. The people at the office cross-referenced a missing master key to her appointment book and put together what place she must have been showing. They called police with the location of where she had been showing the home and rushed over there themselves. When police went inside, they found a disturbing scene, and Charlotte Fimiano was dead. I want to thank you for taking time out of your week to listen to the podcast. If you appreciate the work I'm doing, please consider following it on wherever you listen to podcasts and following us on Instagram at SimplerTimeCrimePod. That's where I primarily post most of the pictures that go along with the episodes, and they can help you get a better picture for what I'm talking about. That's at SimplerTimeCrimePod. Charlotte Fimiano was found in the home having been strangled and shot. From all the source material I can find, sexual assault did not appear to be a motive or to occur, nor had robbery, making determining the motive a challenge. Though it should be of note that investigators on this case have been incredibly tight-lipped. For example, investigators shared with the public that she had died by ligature strangulation, but declined to say what item was used to strangle her or if it was found at the house. They also did not share any information on the caliber weapon used in the shooting. Charlotte's case has not had much in the way of public leads, so it'll be harder for me to do a deep dive on the progression of the case. We do know detectives said they were stumped for a motive, which leads me to believe all the obvious things you would look for didn't occur here, missing valuable items or signs of a sexual assault. Her broker firm put up a $100,000 reward for information, and nothing really came of that. We know that the National Association of Realtors drew up guidelines shortly after her murder in the late 1990s, giving tips to agents on how to remain safe. We also know that offices local to her, including her own, began implementing a process and policy requiring photo ID before showing properties. Everything was examined. The thought that maybe a stranger with a fantasy who had identified means to commit this crime carried this out, and all the way through considering the idea that it was a murder for hire plot. If you're wondering if Christian had something to do with it, police cleared him by December of 97. Because police are so private about this case, we actually don't know how they reached to that conclusion. And in an effort to protect the case, they may have cast undue speculation on her husband. People always look towards the husband and those closest to the victim first. So I think that the public was waiting for the official reasons why he was cleared or what his alibi was. And unfortunately, short of having that, speculation was rampant. But every chance they got, investigators stated that both her daughter and her husband were cooperative. I feel for them because it really seems they just wanted to grieve privately, but that very reasonable wish cast suspicion. In the first month after her disappearance, police had interviewed over 20 Weicker agents and employees alone, combing through leads. Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli said to the newspaper The Morning Call, quote, "The interviews take time because any information could lead us in the direction. Something that could be very innocent or not deemed important by the person could tie to the crime," end quote. When the case cooled down, an additional reward was offered for information in conjunction with the already sitting $100,000. But no leads came, and eventually the largest of those rewards expired. Charlotte's case is actually one of many where real estate agents were victims or attempted victims of violent crimes across the country. In 1996, a 22-year-old agent named Michelle Anglin was showing a model home to someone posing as a buyer. He picked the most secluded model home. Police believe that he talked the young agent into showing him the full house, and when they arrived in the master bedroom, the attack took place. He sexually assaulted and murdered Michelle and hid her under the bed. About a half hour later, another couple showed up and noticed nobody working in the office. They opted to tour the homes themselves, but found signs of a struggle in the final home and alerted police. A nearby neighbor had gotten a description of the man and his truck because they had seen someone suspicious leaving the model home that afternoon. And the news of the man they were looking for prompted another agent to come forward with her terrifying experience. Kim Ramos was working at a model home office 5 miles away when a man had come in and asked for a tour of the model home. That was the same day as Michelle's murder, just hours before. She had a weird feeling about him from the get-go, and when they began walking to the model home, he was walking very close to her. She just said she had this sense that he was invading her personal space. She said when they got to the home, she found he wasn't asking her questions about the home, but questions about her. Are these your typical hours? Do you work alone? As they reached the master bedroom, she stayed in the hallway near the stairs and let him go into it. But she just had a bad feeling about it. And she said he sort of turned to her and stared at her, and that his whole demeanor changed. She said he turned cold and his eyes got dark, and just the hair on the back of her neck stood up. So something in her told her to just run. So she, without warning, just booked it down the stairs. And she said with every step she took, he was right behind her. And that she described in an interview she could feel his breath on her shoulder. That's how close he was. And then as soon as they reached outside, suddenly his demeanor changed back again. And he was back to being this agreeable customer and just said, thanks for your time, got in his truck. And so she kind of second-guessed herself and thought maybe I overreacted and that was nothing. Until she saw the news. She was terrified and she contacted investigators. Believe it or not, this guy had signed into her sign-in sheet with his real name. James Van Adams was arrested, charged, and found guilty of murder after his DNA tied back to the crime scene. He was on Arizona's death row until he died by suicide. It should be of note that before this, he had done this in another state. Not an actual murder, but he had done an attempted sexual assault, and it was the same type of scenario. So this was his MO, to try to go after real estate agents. Another case is that of Sherry Lewis in Decatur, Illinois. In late September of '96, she took a call to show a property to a new potential client. The home was a vacant home on the very end of a dead-end residential street. After the showing, she was supposed to meet her twin sister at an event called the Decatur Festival, but she never showed. At 8 p.m. on that same evening, the property owner's son noticed the realtor's car still in the driveway. It didn't say in any of the source material if he phoned police or if it was he who made the discovery, but ultimately, Sherry's body was found in the kitchen of the property. She had been beaten and strangled to death. According to Phil Jacobs' piece in the Herald and Review, police stated that it didn't appear she had been sexually assaulted. Other news sources stated that her purse and personal belongings were found inside the house, but her keys were left outside in her dark green Toyota Camry. Her case remains unsolved to this day, though her sister has said publicly that police know who did it and just haven't brought charges against him. Perhaps one of the more chilling cases is that of convicted felon Frank Yeager. He was someone targeting agents right in the Lehigh Valley area, the same area as Charlotte Fimiano, though he is not old enough to have committed the crime in '97. In November of 2012, Frank Yeager approached a saleswoman at a model home agency and asked to see a home. She had a bad feeling about him, and she noticed he didn't even ask any questions, even basic ones like the price of the home. So she said, "Go ahead and tour it, and you can kind of give yourself a self-tour." He returned 45 minutes later and told her that the home had a water leak in it, and he insisted she come with him to see it. At that same moment, a male colleague entered and Yeager immediately left. When the female agent went to the home to check out the leak, she found out there wasn't one. But she did find the curtains had been pulled shut and the lights had been turned off. She called police, and the description she gave matched a man who had visited other realtors in the area. So state police got involved. When they located Yeager, police searched his home and truck, which uncovered a knapsack containing matches, duct tape, 2 handguns, ammunition, rope, a ski mask, metal chains, and padlocks, among many other items. According to Pennsylvania State Police, Yeager had spent months researching potential victims. He accumulated a list of more than 200 area realtors, and he researched people's addresses. He found their Facebook pages, their businesses. He found out where they attended church and schools they attended. He had put together like a whole spreadsheet. His diary was graphic, and he had a manifesto about rape, murder, and his own death by suicide. In one entry, he wrote, quote, "I have been planning and wanting to do this my whole life. The help I need is too great, and I would rather die. I truly enjoy the hunt and cannot wait for my prize," end quote. Yes, that is absolutely nightmare fuel, and he is still currently incarcerated, though only for a limited time. In 2011, Ashley Oakland was holding an open house for a townhome in West Des Moines when someone walked in and inexplicably gunned her down. There was no apparent motive, and her case remains unsolved. The cases I just highlighted were cases against women, but male agents are targets too. Oftentimes, robbery can be a motive, and there are plenty of cases of this. In one instance, a real estate agent named John, who was from a small rural town, set up a showing where he arranged to show a isolated farmhouse to potential buyer. That man seemed good and trustworthy, but when they started walking through the house, he had a bad feeling about it, which is just proof that men have intuition too, and also should trust their gut. Suddenly, the buyer pulled out a weapon and demanded money. Amazingly, John had remained calm, and he explained that he had none, but he suggested they leave the house to check his car. When they got out to his car, he pressed the emergency button on his keychain alarm, which emitted a loud siren. This startled the attacker, which caused him to flee, luckily. John's case had a happy ending, whereas the infamous case of Beverly Carter did not. She was abducted from a rural Arkansas property that was used as bait by a couple. They planned to hold her for ransom, but ultimately killed her when their plan failed. Her case has had a huge impact on safety in real estate, and her surviving children have dedicated a whole foundation in her honor that helps keep agents safe. I wanted to know exactly what the current stats were on all of this, so I dug in. Since 2010, there have been approximately 83 murders of real estate professionals, and in that same time frame, there have been 940 non-fatal assaults according to the Department of Labor Statistics. A study in 2011 indicated the following trends. Women real estate agents make up 70% of the assault victims. The majority of these attacks occur on Thursday or Friday afternoon. Guns are used in 50% of the attacks, and robbery was the primary intention of going into most of these attacks. In looking in the why behind these safety issues, a few of the reasons are that agents often work alone with people they don't know in locations they can't control, and they rely on public advertising to draw attention and traffic to open houses. Statistics vary on this next part because it requires personal stories and data is difficult to collect on this, but one survey conducted stated that up to 40% of seasoned agents have had at least one brush with an incident that made them uncomfortable, or a potential client or situation that did. So to learn more about the landscape of what agents truly face, I sat down with my friend and realtor Julia. She helped me buy my home over the summer and kindly agreed to discuss this difficult topic to give a firsthand account of the dangers many people don't realize exist in this line of work. The first thing I wondered was how the landscape of safety has changed over time for real estate agents.
Yeah, it's actually pretty crazy because when I first got into real estate, the safety factor never even came to mind. I actually remember being at like my first, like I'd gotten my license, and then there's like some required courses that you have to take before, like within a certain period of time. And one of them was this safety program. And the realtor was like, there have been crimes in Rochester against realtors showing homes. And I was sitting in this room like, oh my God, what are you talking about? Because it never even occurred to me, naive little me, that, things could happen like that. And so I do think that there have been a lot of changes since, 97. I think a lot of changes have even happened since I got my license, 13 years ago. There's definitely more of a vetting process. So for example, if I don't know a person, like if a person hasn't been directly referred to me, I will not meet them at a home. My first meeting is always in the office so that I have a face-to-face with the person during business hours, and I do vet them. I do get their a copy of their license, just for like due diligence. I think it protects me, it protects the seller, it protects the listing agent, and it protects the office. I think it's just a good due diligence to make sure that you're vetting whomever you're taking out into these homes for everybody's protection. And I went to this real estate seminar one time, and the guy leading it basically said never apologize for requiring meetings like that, because there are people that will give you a lot of pushback of like, oh, if I like the home, then we can meet at your office, or, let's see how things go. But if someone's not willing to take the time up front to meet with you, to talk about what they're looking for, to talk about where they are in the process, then they're probably also not really worth your time as a client. I mean, buying a home is a huge
Yeah.
process, and it's a huge decision, that those initial meetings are really crucial. And so to me, I mean, I have a husband, I have kids, I have a family, that if someone's not willing to take that time to establish who they are and what their intentions are, then to me it's never going to be worth the sale.
The next thing I wanted to know about was what training agents went through when they became certified. Is there any annual trainings they have to do or any mandatory safety courses?
Yeah, the safety training is actually, so in the beginning, I can't remember what training it was. I actually think I was at like an ethics and codes meeting that was required, but they talked about safety in that class, probably because we were all new agents and they could probably see our young, naive faces, that maybe they brought it up. But there are a lot of safety courses that are put on through the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, so that agents have access to ways to protect themselves. They also have a list of, I think it's like 50 ways to protect yourself as an agent on their website. So they are always pushing information out to agents. There's a Beverly Carter Foundation, which I know I mentioned to you before. They actually brought in his or her son, and he talked about his mom and everything that she went through as a realtor, to kind of bring that top of mind. I mean, nobody likes to be reminded of kind of the dark side of our trade, but I think we would be remiss to not talk about things like that. And so I think anytime you're able to have those conversations and open a dialogue with other agents of what they're doing to protect themselves is really important. So a lot of the training, it's not required, but they do cover things like when you're, in a home, what should you be doing? So for instance, I never walk in front of a client. I always let the client be the first one to go through the door so that you're never turning your back to them. Little things like parking, I never park in a position where I wouldn't be able to get out of a property. So whether it be on the road or backing into a home, I certainly always put on my location so everybody knows where I'm going. And if they haven't heard from me, they know my last location. And my mother-in-law gave me like a noise soundboard that is like, I've actually never pulled it, but I've been told it's very loud. So there's a lot of new technology since 97, since the past 13 years to increase realtor safety. There's a lot of apps. I mean, there's Life 360. So I think first, like letting people know where you are, but then also you have to take responsibility for your own individual actions when you're going into these homes, because you can vet someone all day long, but you also have to be, on alert of where you are and how you're operating yourself.
Charlotte Fimiano's case dealt with meeting somebody one-to-one for a private showing, but another area that's very dangerous is open houses. So I asked Julia to talk a little bit further about that.
Things like open houses, that's like a big one for me of like, I'm not a huge fan of open houses. I always think that the best buyers are the buyers going through with their agents, but certainly I do hold open houses. And one thing is I'll always park my car again in a place where I can, if I have to leave quickly, I can get out. I always know where my exits are in the home. I never bring anything of value to these open houses. So I'll take off, jewelry. I won't bring my laptop. I typically don't bring my wallet, just so I'm not putting myself in a position where I am going to be highlighting something that a person might want. If it's a nice day, I'll actually sit outside and let people go through the home. I always stay up. If it's not nice outside, I'm inside. I'll stay on the main floor of the home. I never follow people into basements. I never go upstairs with them, which is why, when I'm representing a seller, I always tell people, make sure you're removing your valuables, because I'm not following people through homes, because it, is not a good position to be in with strangers, because you don't know who's going through the home. It could be a lovely person, but it could also be someone with not great intentions as well. So there's a lot of kind of factors that come into play when you're, operating in different situations, and every situation is a little bit different. But again, there's good people out there and there's bad people as well.
Yeah.
Quick is with the open houses.
Yeah.
One thing that I always tell my sellers when we're talking about whether or not to have an open house is that sometimes it does put them in a precarious position as well. So because we don't know who's going through the home, we haven't vetted that person, that sometimes they could also be casing them or their
Mm-hmm.
home to come back to get things as well. So I would say, if there's a seller and they are insistent on having an open house and the agent is like, oh, I don't know if that's a great idea, it might be because they actually have their seller's interests, first and foremost. They're not being difficult, but I think taking everyone's safety into consideration there. So just want to circle back and make that one
Yeah,
point of like,
no.
it's not necessarily that a realtor doesn't want to have an open house, but there are a lot more things to think about in today's day and age.
Given the dangers of these crimes happening because of isolation, I wondered how often do real estate agents use the buddy system?
No, I mean, sometimes I'm on my own, but whenever possible, I actually try to have another agent there with me. And agents, we all are in the same boat. So I feel like whenever I've asked someone to be there, people show up. So, and we're always happy to repay the favor for one another because we know what it's like to be in an industry where there are a lot of unknown variables at play. I've also brought my husband with me. He won't necessarily come into the home. He gets to sit in the car and, watch things on his phone and just keep an eye on things. He's always happy to do that as well, just so that people know where you are. I've had my mom offer to come with me. So sometimes people should know that even if it appears a realtor is alone at a home, they aren't always alone. There's people kind of on standby and nearby, keeping an eye on them because safety is always the number one priority. I know I said it before, but one sale is never worth putting yourself in a bad spot.
In this episode, I talked a few times about dangers that occurred when somebody worked at a model home development where new builds were taking place and an office was set up there. And I think that part of the risk with that is that it has all the inherent risks that anybody else faces in real estate, but also a suspect could potentially have a more controlled environment that they're able to stake out in advance. They can stake out a particular agent's hours and if she's alone. And so it's an even more controlled environment. So I asked Julia, is that something that still occurs? Is that typically still a model where they have agents working? And what does that look like now versus back in some of these 1990s cases? What's the difference in safety?
Yeah, they do. So a lot of times there is an office set up at a model home, and the model is typically open, 5 days a week, or if it's not open 5 days a week, they'll have it open, Saturday, Sunday, every weekend where there is an agent staffed there. Sometimes there's an office actually at the model, sometimes there's not. But yeah, that model absolutely still is out there. And again, I think those agents are always, you know, trying to protect themselves. Typically with model homes, there is some type of like security camera there. So there are safety precautions kind of in place, but again, they're probably taking some personal precautions.
So, the next thing I wanted to know was what we can do as people who are buying homes or selling homes. What can we do to help keep agents safer in our role as consumers or partners in this process?
Well, I know one thing is like, obviously, I'm very fortunate to work a lot by referral. So I wasn't necessarily like, I need to know who's coming with you. I think if you know a person, you feel more comfortable automatically with them and who they're bringing along. But if you don't know a person, right, and let's say someone calls me and they want to see a house, I've had people give me a lot of pushback when I ask them, one, to meet with me beforehand, two, to let me take a picture of their license, three, when I ask them where they are in the financial process. You'd be surprised at how much pushback that I will receive from some buyers who are basically like cold calling me just off of listings or finding me online. And I think it's important for those buyers to realize we're not trying to make the process difficult for them. It's not like I'm, trying to get unnecessary information. So I think one thing a buyer can do is kind of put themselves in a realtor's shoes, because I don't think people would be super excited to hop in their car and drive and meet a stranger. So I think just kind of the common courtesy of like, okay, if I was in their shoes, what would I expect or want from them? I think you were very gracious, to put yourself automatically in my shoes of what you would want. But that is a nice, gesture of like letting them know who is coming with them to the showing is always super beneficial. There's been some more recent changes within the real estate now since you and I even looked. And one is that before any showing, we have to have a buyer representation agreement, where basically before I could even show a prospective buyer a home, they have to sign a form agreeing that they are working with me and I am their agent. And I think that process has actually helped vet a lot of buyers, because then they have to be a little bit more serious. They have to have a contract with an agent. So I also think, there's some upfront legwork that's now required of buyers, whereas before a buyer could just call and say, I want to see this home. And, I'd hop in my car, considering like if I knew them or a past client, but now there's a little bit more required legwork that goes into it that I think is helping keep the industry a little bit safer as well.
Lastly, I really wanted to hear from Julia. Has she ever had an instance where she felt uncomfortable with maybe a potential buyer or while on the job, or anybody who she works with who has a story?
Yeah, I mean, I actually did. I was having an open house, my least favorite thing to do, maybe. And I actually did feel very uncomfortable. I actually ended up going and sitting outside during this open house. A gentleman came in, and this was actually just this past year, and was making comments on my appearance. He was complimentary, I guess you could consider, but I found it to be kind of highly unprofessional and kind of creepy. That I did not feel comfortable being in the home with him. So I went, with my sign-in sheet, and I sat outside so people could, see me. And I, texted my husband, and he was 5 minutes away. So I think anytime having your phone with you is also probably a good tactic. But also, yeah, that was probably the most recent. I also, my colleague, she once had an open house where the gentleman, he was acting very strange. He was like laying on the couch, saying he wasn't feeling well. Then he went into the basement and wanted her to come look at something in the basement, and she refused to go in the basement. She actually also called her husband. So there's always people, I think you got to have on speed dial or have nearby, because things do happen. Again, both of those scenarios were at open houses. So potentially why we're not huge fans of open houses, just for our safety and the safety of the seller. But those are the two most common. I have heard of other agents being attacked at open houses and being robbed at open houses in Rochester, but they've never personally happened to me. But again, that's why I don't bring anything to open houses. I have nothing of value on me, just my phone. And one thing also worth pointing out too, since TV and Selling Sunset and all of those fun shows to watch, and I personally watch them, I love the drama associated, I guess you could say. But I also don't know if they're 100% realistic, at least where we are, because I always dress in a way that if I needed to get out of a space, I'm not in like 6-inch like stilettos. I'm usually, you've seen me in flats or sneakers, just so that I can get to where I need to go. And I'm not putting myself in a position where I might be attracting the wrong audience.
I want to take a moment to thank Julia for joining me and being so informative for this podcast. I really think that her perspective is valuable to the case at hand and these other unsolved cases in the episode. I'm going to be sharing links on the Instagram this week of some of those cases and where you can report information. But in the meantime, If you have any information on the murder of Charlotte Fimiano, please contact the Pennsylvania Crime Stoppers toll-free at 1-800-472-8477.